The age-old question of creation has visited the mind of man, both in the field of science and religion, since way back in recorded history. This book, titled Cosmos, the Soul, and God, written by Charles London Arnold, proposes a hypothesis that could bridge these two varied schools of thoughts. These next few chapters will attempt to bring some or more light to this topic. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. As part of my introduction, I'd like to also send all my family, my friends, and you, fellow subscribers, a heartfelt thank you for your kindness, for sharing my videos, for leaving comments, for hitting those like buttons. Yeah, hit that like button. And what can I say, for being a part of my community. And if you just found me at this video, welcome. I'm so glad you found me. Please do make sure to check out my playlist. I have a rather eclectic channel, so there might be something else that might pique your interest as well. Now back to this topic. One could say that science by its nature operates within the realm of the observable, the measurable, and the testable. We know it to offer insights into the mechanisms of life and consciousness within the physical world, yet for all the advances that we have in technology and such, and for all the new insights that the Big Bang Theory attempts to explain of the origin and development of the universe from a very early, dense, and hot state, unfortunately, we are none the wiser about the initial cause or spark of creation that actually led to the Big Bang itself. It appears that science lacks the tools and methodologies to investigate or demonstrate the origin of the spark itself, and so it remains a profound mystery and an active area of scientific inquiry. And then we have the branch of theology housing the various religions, which for the most part begs its followers to take their version of creation on faith. And I say version because, as I've mentioned in one of my previous videos, one of my pastimes is to search out creation stories and share them here with you. Some come as poems, others shrouded in myth and religion, and others explained through science and the lens of philosophy. So you'll find the Hopi story there. We also have the Secret Book of John, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Plato's Timaeus, and more. Something for everyone. I'm not going to linger here long today. These next few chapters will wrap up a lot of loose ends and also bring up some new discussions, such as immortality and a deeper dive into God. I would love to hear from you, so please do leave your comments. It always brightens my day. And now, let's turn the page. Cosmos, the Soul, and God, by Charles London Arnold. Chapter 7. The individualizing principle in the physical process. The most readily observed fact in the physical process is the tendency to individualization. The atom, of which all things commonly called material are composed, is distinctly individual. This is true, whether the former theory of the atom as an indivisible entity or the later view of it as a congeries of energetic corpuscles called electrons be entertained. As individuals, the atoms act and react upon one another, each after the manner of its kind. The idea of a mass not composed of separate units is inconceivable. There is this inevitable conception of the human mind that any body or mass of matter may not be infinitely divided, but that there must be an ultimate unit that cannot be rent asunder, an infinitesimal absolute individual. Most recently, this conception of the atom has been threatened with utter revolution. The modern views on matter represent this material unit as made up of any number of corpuscles of negative electricity held in the embrace of a sphere of positive electricity. If this is the correct view, then is the atom, as a system, an individual, composed of lesser individuals sustaining relations to other atoms, each a center from which various sorts of control proceed by means of vibrations, passing now to the atom and again forth from it. One thing we certainly know about the atom is that as we descend through the orders of magnitude of individualities of the material world, we finally come upon a very important kind of individual, through the boundaries of which we have found no means of making a breach. Above these, in this veritable hierarchy of being, appear individualities composed of two or more of these atoms, grouped together in some inscrutable way. These individualities, still far beyond the limits of vision, we call molecules. These units or individuals are systems of atoms sustaining peculiar relations to one another, such as they do not sustain to other systems or to the members of other systems. To their environment, they sustain, in some sense, the relation of the subject to the objective world. The system holds itself and its members apart from the world at large. Again, the individualizing is discerned in the formation of the crystals. These combinations of atoms are governed in their formation by geometrical laws and exhibit definite mathematical proportions. It is suggested as probable by Professor Shaler that, quote, every atomic or molecular aggregate has its normal crystal form, the order in which the units group themselves in the state of apparent rest which we associate with solidity. From what we know of crystallization, we conclude that if all the matter of the universe were made free to run its natural course from the original diffuse state to that of a complete solid aggregation, each kind of itself, it would enter finally, as it lost heat, upon the stable condition of the crystal form, which, so far as we can see, is the most fixed of any state. End quote. Footnote. Shaler, The Individual, page 7. The crystals belonging to many species have the characteristics of their respective species and possess also the distinctive qualities of the individual. Each has an individuality of its own. Thus, in many, if not all, of their species, the process of etching brings out on the cleavage planes curious microscopic pits, the forms of which are in general characteristic of the species, while the details of their arrangement appear to be in a measure peculiar to the individual. We pass on to the larger individuals of the physical world, the stars and planets, as well as the individual systems, the members of which, bound together by the mysterious bond of gravitation, observe orderly movements and sustain relations among themselves apart from all the rest of the world. In previous pages, we have stated the general belief of astronomers that the matter now composing the innumerable heavenly bodies was at the beginning diffused throughout and beyond the realm of the fixed stars, the remotest and still invisible suns. Then, the portions of this mass had no individual characteristics. All was uniformity and chaos. The process began, which has ever continued, the evolution of the individual. We observe these individualities emerging from this original and simple estate and winning their individual isolation. All this world of individualities, bodies, and systems is in broad contrast with the undifferentiated ether, which may possibly be a portion of the physical or material world which has not yet entered on its way towards individualization. Our point is that the inorganic world reveals a universal tendency to individualization and individualizing principle. We might, without exaggeration, say that in this individualizing process, all the real work has been done within the material world. When we pass upward in the order of complexity from the inorganic into the organic world, there can be no doubt whatever of the universal tendency to individuation. 2 million or more species of insects and hosts of species of birds and beasts and higher animals are crowded with individuals, all conforming to the laws of their own peculiar morphology. Each individual is a ripple on the surface of the species stream of life. These individuals alone manifest the energy of the species. All progress is but the development of the individuals which appear, have their day, and pass on the results of their experience to those that come after. All the characteristics of the individuals in the organic as in the inorganic world are physical. The accumulated effects of experience are all written in the physical organism. Even in man, all that is transmitted from parent to child by the way of heredity is some principle of brain conformation, whereby the organ of mind of the child is made to reproduce certain peculiar characteristics of the father's and mother's brains. It is inconceivable that anything like thought could be handed down as an inheritance. How often the son manifests the disposition and mental traits of the father. Yet we cannot believe that this psychical resemblance is a direct inheritance from the parent. Of course, the brain, which is the instrument of our thinking, is to the utmost detail of its conformation determined by heredity, at least until the individual life begins to shape it. These inherited brain features must afford the way to thought to manifest itself as in and through the ancestral brain. We are not, on this supposition, placing ourselves under necessity to believe that thought in any way may be a secretion of the brain cells. We must recognize the indisputable fact that there is some immediate connection between the state and condition of the organ and the thought that is manifested by it in consciousness. From wherever thought may come, its coming forth must be in some way determined by the peculiar state of the brain, such as may be altogether due to ancestral influences. Every distinct brain condition or state may indeed, we insist, must determine and give rise to a definite mental process. It is clearly evident that all these varieties of inorganic and organic individualities differ widely from what in man we term personality. Man, physically, is an individual like these others we have been talking about, but man, as a self-conscious, self-determining soul or personality, is quite beyond our powers to investigate. We may, however, suppose that as all the material individualities are or have been formed from material or stuff of the physical world, so the soul, personality, or conscious self in some way altogether inscrutable to us rises out of the substance or energy of the cosmos or psychical universe. If there is in the physical process everywhere manifest an individualizing principle, then may we not legitimately infer that this same principle is cosmic in its application? On the hypothesis that this present physical process is but the phenomenal manifestation of some forms of the infinite energy of the psychical universe or cosmos, we may legitimately reason from the things that are seen to those that are not seen. We may legitimately conclude that, by some action of the normal human brain at a certain stage of its development, the soul or personality of each human individual is individuated out of the substance or energy of the infinite, eternal, and infinitely energetic psychical universe. This is much more rational than the materialistic theory that the brain produces mind and thought. Professor Shaler thinks he finds some evidence that concrete thought may be inherited in the nature of the actions where the mind, for any reason, becomes so disordered that it is the prey to delusions. This evidence is furnished by the fact that the control of the individual consciousness over the mental process is lost, and accidental suggestions, such as can hardly rest on experience, rule the mind. This is most questionable evidence of anything whatsoever, and certainly has no bearing on the problem of the heredity of thought, concrete or abstract. The author quoted, after offering the above evidence, proceeds to assume the position of the materialist and declares it to be evident that the physical mechanism of the brain of itself may produce thoughts which are not the product or personal experience. To establish this assertion, he further declares that it is in accord with the common empirical judgment which men of all races and ages have made as to the nature of insanity, which is in effect that the afflicted are possessed by ideas not truly their own, but suggested by some other personality, as by evil spirits. It seems impossible to escape materialistic implications in investigating any question concerning the relation of mind to matter or of mental to brain changes upon any hypothesis now generally accepted. The author above quoted has no desire to pose as a materialist, but is forced into this position by the exigencies of his cosmic theory. Accepting the doctrine of the soul as an entity, making use of the brain as its organ, and coming into the body at some particular moment in the life of the organism, he is perplexed at finding, under certain conditions, such as insanity, somnambulism, etc., that accountable seeds or norms of thought come in an entirely sporadic manner and not in any way connected with the ordinary mental occupations of the observer. In other places, he calls these spontaneous thoughts. Again, they are described as outside the ordinary experience and not regulated by the balance wheel of consciousness. He accounts for these as products of the mechanism of the brain itself, while the normal mental activities of the personality are termed products of personal experience, whatever that may mean. I am not criticizing these statements as the errors of the Harvard professor, but as the inevitable conclusions of those who hold a dualistic view of the universe or cosmos. All through the preceding pages of this book, I have taken occasion to point out the numerous inconsistencies and inextricable difficulties into which those who hold such views must fall. If, as Romain said, materialism is conspicuously inadequate to account for the facts, and spiritualism is beset with the difficulties of a necessary and fundamental kind, and these are now the only views of the universe generally accepted, then can there be no possible escape from illogical and inadequate conceptions and theories by any attempt, no matter how skillful, to combine these irreconcilable cosmic hypotheses? Only a monism that hypothesizes an infinite, eternal, and infinitely energetic psychical universe, of which the physical process and all conceivable or possible processes are but phases, is able to offer any satisfactory explanation of the whole of experience and the observed facts of the physical world. Without resort to demonology or spontaneous products of the brain, we are able to afford a solution of these perplexities, at once reasonable and satisfactory. The normal brain, at each stage of its development in the individual, affords the means of the soul's normal activities. If the brain be diseased or mutilated so that its powers of psychical expression be enfeebled, we have the phenomena of imbecility. If by any means the cellular, neurotic, or elemental activities of a normally developed brain become deranged and disordered, we have the phenomena of one of the many types of insanity. In these instances, forms of psychical energy not belonging to the ordered and regulated forces of the individuated soul break violently upon the physical organ of the mind and awaken strange and unusual phantoms and fancies, furtive thoughts, evanescent and protean visions flitting about the soul outside of the normal consciousness. These mental or psychical activities, not always or at first subject to the will's control, like the subtones in music, which, unheard indeed, make all the difference between the tinkling of some paltry instrument and the supreme tone of the violin, enrich and glorify the life of the human soul. They are the play of the higher psychical forces, which, with larger liberty of action than that of the individuated powers of the personality, touch and waken to the supreme activity certain highly developed portions of the brain. Genius may thus be accounted for as the manifestation of higher and unindividuated psychical forces through some abnormally or excessively developed functioning powers of the brain. As we have before said, to regard genius as due to some rare spiritual gift bestowed upon the mind in some unaccountable and miraculous way is to presume that there is a beneficent bestower of these superior powers who, with unmistakable partiality, makes a chosen few the beneficiaries of this rich dower. As genius is not hereditary, it could not have been evolved from lower forms of intelligence. It is sporadic and thus far unaccountable. One thing has been experimentally established regarding men of genius and of unusual mental powers: that such persons have abnormally developed brains and certain special functioning powers of the organ of mind. This being so, we must accept the fact that all the phenomena of genius are due to specially developed brain powers. I cannot but regard individualization as revealing the constant struggle of the unseen to utter itself in all possible modes. This revelation of physical or cosmic forces is most significant and is shown in innumerable ways. The individualities belonging to the lower groups, those of the mechanical order, the atoms, molecules, crystals, and the heavenly bodies, exert a certain action upon their environment corresponding exactly to the reaction of the environment, and vice versa. Even in the higher organic groups, the same law holds good. Within the body, the inorganic units of which it is composed and act and react among one another much in the same way they would if not belonging to an individual system. At length, there is manifest a gradual change taking place in the mode of discharging the energy received from without, so that a new element enters in, and action and reaction after a mechanical mode cease to account for the whole relationship between the organism and its environment. The sound of an insulting word or epithet falls upon the ear. Immediately, all the powers of the body are called into activity. The face flushes, the eyes flash, the fists clench, and with mighty force the body is thrown upon that of the offender. There is something here quite different from the action and equivalent reaction of the lower groups, something widely different from mere reflex action of muscles to a particular stimulus. Here is action from within, impulse or will effort, in response to something more than the mere physical effect of sound waves breaking upon the organ of hearing. There has taken place an interpretation of the sound effect, which is made by the soul. The utterance of the insulting word was the result of a desire of the person speaking to make known his contempt for or bitterness toward his enemy, and the response was prompted by a similar motive on the latter's part, or rather by a feeling of resentment or revenge. The magnitude of the importance of such an incident is largely due to the subjective or physical element entering into it. As we have before said, all these individualities from the lowest inorganic group to the highest among organic forms reveal the constant struggle of the physical forces of the unseen to give expression to their activities. The corpuscles tend to form the atom. The atoms have a tendency to unite and form the molecule, and with irresistible impulse, the elements seek to unite in innumerable compounds. And thus, energy from without continually impels to the individuation as one mode of its self-expression. The tendency of atoms to enter into the crystal state is yet another effort of energy to manifest itself in doing work. In the vegetable world, the same tendency is strongly in evidence. The force that expands the seed, that pushes the tender blade through hard surface of the ground, that lifts the stalk ever higher and higher against gravitation, that develops blade and ear and the full corn in the ear, is an effort of self-expression or self-revelation. The bud, the expanding flower, the forming and ripening fruit, all manifest the same strong inclination of the physical and hidden forces to utter themselves. Is it not more than a fancy that the grace of the palm tree and the pine, the beautiful symmetry of other kinds of forest and shade trees, the chaste elegance and beauty of the lily and the rose, are due to a tendency in the forces of nature to give proper and adequate expression of their activities? This is not an evidence of will in nature, but a sort of intelligent impulse or tendency. When we enter the animal kingdom, this tendency is accentuated and is gradually modified in form until will is clearly manifest. The fishes, the birds, the mammals, even the animalculae, which the microscope reveals, are seen to disport themselves as if eager to make known their inmost feelings. It may be a vain fancy to regard chemical affinity as due to the affections and aversions of the elements, but it is not at all fanciful to suppose that all the individuals of the higher organic group have a decided inclination to give utterance to the feelings and impulses which belong to and arise in the inner life. These utterances and responses among the lower animals create and cement the social bonds. The supportive gambols and antics of these individuals are almost always social performances. The general good feeling and playfulness among members of the same community or species, and the antagonisms and antipathies between members of different communities and species are striking facts due not altogether to external or physical relations, but to invisible, friendly, or unfriendly impulses. This instinct, for such it is in birds and many domestic animals, of self-revelation is exhibited in the strut and pluming of certain birds, the prancing of the proud steed, the action of dogs in the company of strange dogs. Innumerable instances might be given in which this instinct is undoubtedly revealed. But in primitive man, we see a distinct advance in this irresistible impulse or instinct of representation. The adornment of the person with gaudy colors and fanciful headgear and striking apparel is an attempt at self-revelation, showing many distinct traits of individual character and taste. Then the song and the dance serve to meet the need. Very early in human development, the practice of the plastic art appears, and by rude drawings and carvings expression is given to the dream of the soul. At length, abler minds, filled with speculations, conjectures, creations of the imagination, and forms of thought, find help to representation in inventions and literature. Thus did man, instinctively and in obedience to a commanding need of expression, develop the powers of the brain to manifest the activities of the human personality. We have then, in this brief study, discovered and traced through inorganic and organic individualities a cosmic tendency toward representation of psychical activities in physical phenomena. In all the groups of inorganic individualities, this is very evidently only the tendency, the inclination, the direction of these cosmic forces. In the lower organic groups, where the individuation is altogether physical, we have the universal instinct of representation. The expression of these inner moods and experiences is invariable in all animals below man, where first we meet with the element of will in controlling these impulses to utterance. As man advances in civilization, we find him bringing the motive of expression more and more under the dominion of the will, and by so doing, restricting the scope of individual growth and creative powers. This development can be promoted only by perfect freedom to exercise the instinct of representation. Communities of reticent and undemonstrative individuals can never be progressive communities. The self-sustained character of Puritanism, closing almost abruptly the brilliant age of Queen Elizabeth, brought also to an end the greatest creative period of English literature. The English character has since then borne the impress of this Puritan spirit. The extreme development of the spirit in the Quaker has created an almost immovable conservatism in Quaker communities. The golden age of every race or nation has been that period when the creative motives found freest and fullest expression in literature and art. End of chapter. Chapter 8. Immortality. A quote by John Fiske. Suppose some Platonists were to urge upon us that all this process of material development, with the discovery of which our patient study has been rewarded, may be but the temporary manifestation of relations otherwise unknown between ourselves and the infinite deity. Suppose he were to argue that physical qualities may be inherent in a spiritual substance which under certain conditions becomes incarnated in matter to wear it as a perishable garment for a brief season, but presently to cast it off and enter upon the freedom of a larger existence. What reply should we be bound to make bearing in mind that the possibilities of existence are in no wise limited to our experience. Obviously, we should be found to admit that in sound philosophy this conclusion is just as likely to be true as that of materialism. End of quote. The supreme question which the soul of man has asked with infinite reiteration, if a man die, shall he live again? Presses as urgently now as ever for a satisfying answer. Any hypothesis offered to account for the origin, destiny, and meaning of the human race must essay to make answer to this interrogation. We have formulated an hypothesis, cosmic in its comprehensiveness, and affecting the very foundations of all philosophy, science, and theology. Certainly this fundamental hypothesis must have something to offer regarding the soul's destiny. We have traced the evolution of the physical process through an unbroken progress from primordial chaos, or rather from its origin in the infinite, eternal, infinitely energetic, psychical universe, to the development of the last and highest product in the human organism. We have seen this evolution to be entirely physical, and the ever more and more marvelous manifestations of psychical phenomena to be due to the development in complexity of structure and constitution of the organs of life and intelligence. We have conceded the most intimate relation possible or conceivable as existing between life and intelligence and organized matter. This intimate relation, which has been to the spiritualist a source of great perplexity, and to the materialist his point of vantage, we have shown to present no difficulty to the one and no advantage to the other. The concomitance of the physical and psychical phenomena in the long process of development is rationally accounted for also. The completeness in itself of the physical process is exhibited. On the material side, we discover the beginning, the becoming, the maturing, and the decaying of all things. There is nothing abiding. Change and decay are visible on every hand. The type, the species endures. The individuals come and go. Every form arising, going on in development to maturity, then passing gradually down the pathway of decay and death, at length falls into dissolution, the body returns to the dust, and the great stream of psychical energy sweeps on, unabated in strength. Nothing is lost. Only one locus of psychical manifestation has disappeared. When at length the ever-developing organism has reached the limit of its improvement, when the personal being, man, appears, and the brain is no longer simply played upon by the mighty stream of intelligence, but detaches and attains spiritual forces creating a personality, we find along with the dawning of self-consciousness the beginning of the possibility of a higher, more enduring life. We conceive of the soul as becoming more and more a distinct entity, yet still immersed in the great stream of psychical energy. It has motions and activities peculiarly its own, while not yet separated from the universe unseen. As we have before seen, the human soul as a personality possesses certain attributes which bring it into relations with God and with other finite persons, and also set the soul and the psychical universe over against each other as subject and object. Science has not been able to formulate or authorize any doctrine of even the probability of the continuance of the life of man after death. All it has been able to do is to clear the way for the possibility of a future existence. It has afforded man a standing point, whence he may see the beckoning hand of hope, and without irrationality embrace and hold fast the faith that the Creator and Sustainer of the universe will not, by the utter wreck of the physical world, put his intelligent children to inextricable intellectual confusion. Perhaps in our ignorance, certain analogies may help us to realize the possibility that steadily developing ephemeral conscious life may reach a critical point where it suddenly puts on immortality. Such are almost the last words publicly uttered by the most hopeful and optimistic exponent of the teachings of Herbert Spencer, Mr. Fiske, and support our statement that present-day science and philosophy have no aid to offer us in our search for another life. Upon the hypothesis of an infinite, eternal, infinitely energetic, psychical universe, the manifestations of certain forms of whose energy constitute the physical world, we must regard the question of survival after death as entirely outside the range of physical science. If the whole process of evolution is within the material world, and its highest product is the brain of man, then it in no way concerns itself with anything spiritual, or any mode of existence outside the physical process. But if this is true, any other evidence that may be produced in behalf of the soul's survival after death is not invalidated or impaired by any possible advance of science or any discoveries that may be made in the phenomena of the material world. The physical process, as it bears no witness to God, His existence and attributes, so does it offer no evidence or even suggestion of the soul's immortality. All those analogies so commonly employed as affording proof of man's future life are now seen to be altogether without evidential value. The imagery of the egg and the butterfly will not bear scientific examination. That which dies does not live again in the physical world. We need not pause to consider any intimations of immortality in the physical process, but finding the way clear, we may pass on to those general considerations of philosophic analogy and moral probability which may afford us some help in our eager inquiry. Here has arisen in the minds of almost all former writers upon this subject the question as to the scope of the argument for a life after death. Are all conscious beings embraced within the range of the arguments? Are we to believe that there is a future life for certain higher animals? Our answer has already been made. We have shown good reason for withholding self-consciousness from even the highest animals. There is no possible reason why we should believe that consciousness and the possibility of a future life for the individual are coexistent and coextensive. Then we sometimes hear the further perplexing question asked: how could immortal man have been produced from an ephemeral brute? The relevance of this question is shown to have been removed when we confine all development to the physical process and accept the theory that in its constitution the soul is immortal, and the only question is as to the endurance of the personality. The existence of the human personality is based upon the irrefutable testimony of self-consciousness and cannot be questioned. There is no evidence whatever of the existence of personality in the highest brutes. Mr. Fiske tells us that Voltaire asked questions to which he declares the most proper answer is a frank confession of ignorance. These are the questions: when does the immortal soul of the human individual come into existence? Is it at the moment of conception, or when the newborn babe begins to breathe, or at some moment between, or even perhaps at some era of early childhood when moral responsibility can be said to have begun? To these questions, there is one answer which, upon our hypothesis, is at once adequate and inevitable. Those higher psychic forces which in man we call mind are operative just at that moment when the brain of the embryo or newborn infant reaches the degree of complexity of organization in structure and constitution that affords a locus for the manifestation of these higher spiritual or psychic forces. In the phylogenetic evolution of man, the same is true. The developing organism grows on toward perfection, manifesting at every step higher and higher forms of psychic energy until at last the self-conscious soul appears not as the product of the physical evolution, but incidental to this highest stage of development. Some scientists regard it as a maxim that nature makes no leaps. Others deny the truth of this statement and declare that nature's habit is to make prodigious leaps. Upon our hypothesis, the maxim is true, but to the observant student of nature, the latter statement appears true also. The development of the physical organism goes on without gap or interruption, but suddenly, at the moment when the conditions are perfect, the new psychical phenomena is manifested. The illustration used by Mr. Fisk is clear and luminous. Slowly grows the eccentricity of the ellipse as you shift its position in the cone, and still the nature of the curve is not essentially varied, when suddenly, presto, one more little shift and the finite ellipse becomes an infinite hyperbola, mocking our feeble powers of conception as it speeds away on its everlasting career. There is no leap here. Only that which we could not perceive in its gradual development suddenly burst upon us. Life, whether mortal or immortal, has two essential factors: a living organism and a fit environment in which to live. Life has been properly defined as the action of an organism upon its environment and the reaction resulting therefrom. We must have then something that lives and a place or conditions in which to live. If we are to live after death, we must live somewhere and carry on our conscious existence in relations and under conditions of which we can have knowledge. Correspondence and knowledge are identical terms in respect to conscious being. Upon our hypothesis, the living spirit, by its constitution capable of unending existence and an eternal perfect environment, are at hand. The living entity and the conditions of living are provided. In this life, the living body, with all its powers unimpaired, must be capable of corresponding constantly and without interruption with its essential environment. A failure on the part of the body to correspond with the air through the lungs by an outward interruption would result in death through poisoning of the blood. One falling unexpectedly into deep water and being unable to keep his head above the surface would die of drowning because unable to adjust himself to his sudden change of environment. Sometimes disease attacks the lungs and renders them incapable of properly oxidizing the blood, and death again results, this time from impairment of the organism. It cannot be contended that this physical body is capable of continued existence for an indefinite period of time. The forces of life and death are too nearly equal in strength in these mortal bodies for an extension of existence indefinitely. Then, too, the physical environment in the midst of which man finds himself is subject to startling and sudden changes, which are constantly endangering the equilibrium of these contending forces. The force that makes possible man's living upon the surface of earth may at any time cause his death by falling. The vital air may, by a change of temperature, endanger his life by a drought. Heat, cold, and dampness, all essential to his temporal well-being, may be causes of his death. The food he eats may also imperil his life, and his very pleasures are often quaffed form a cup whose dregs are deadly poison to the body. Under favorable circumstances he may prolong his days beyond the narrow limits of 80 years and 10, but then is his strength but labor and sorrow. We have not then, in the human body, an organism capable of long-continued physical existence, and our changeful environment ever threatens to cut us suddenly short in our career upon earth. Perfect life is perfect correspondence with an enduring and perfectly conditioned environment. Either the environment must be changelessly fixed, or there must be a perfect correlation between changes in environment and adaptations in the organism. Upon our hypothesis, we have an environment perfect, infinite, and infinitely energetic, with which an organism perfectly adjusted may continuously correspond forever. We then have the spiritual organism and the environment, the essential factors of the problem of future existence. It is further evident that the soul, being what it is upon our supposition, and sustaining such relations to the material organism as we assume, cannot depend upon that organism for continued existence of its powers. Bodily death of an animal is, so far as the higher psychical phenomena are concerned, but the destruction or removal of the material locus of certain physical manifestations. By impairment of any of the vital organs, the whole body at length becomes incapable of manifesting the forces of life and intelligence from the unseen. Death, as we know, that dread catastrophe, has nothing whatever to do with the continuance of those psychical forces, the manifestations of which in the physical process we call life and intelligence. The assertion that death ends all is at once ruled out of consideration by our hypothesis. If, however, we conceive the soul as nascent in the womb of nature, its gestative mother, then of course, at every step of its developing existence, it is dependent for its being upon matter and the physical forces. But we have seen that not a single fact discovered by science can be advanced as affording any evidence that there is any such thing as an evolution of spiritual or psychic forces. The psychical are the true phenomena, being, as known to us, the manifestations of psychical energy. Hitherto, science has not repudiated the statement of Professor LeConte as hereafter quoted. Quote, "Thus then, nature, through the whole geologic history of the earth, was gestative mother of spirit, which, after its long embryonic development, came to birth and independent life and immortality in man. All evolution has its beginning, its course, its end. I repeat, without spirit immortality, the cosmos has no meaning. Now mark, it is equally evident that without this gestative method of creation of spirit, the whole geological history of the world previous to man would have no meaning. If man's spirit were made at once out of hand, why all this elaborate preparation by evolution of the organic kingdom? The whole evolution of the cosmos through infinite time is a gestative process for the birth of spirit." End quote. Such an hypothesis raises all sorts of unanswerable questions and stands squarely in the way of any argument for immortality. Think of the infinite travail of the eternal cosmos to bring forth at last the human spirit. Here we have a struggling, developing material universe with the burden of gestation and the pangs of parturition endured through an infinite past, giving birth at length to a spiritual being that is to endure forever in a psychical environment. The less brings forth the greater. The ephemeral is gestative mother to the eternal. It would indeed be inconceivable that all the elaborate preparation by evolution of the organic kingdom should have been made without reference to the bringing forth of an adequate result, some product worthy of the infinite effort. But would the birth of a single or of several human souls be an adequate result of the infinite gestation of the material world? If in this way the first human soul came to existence, how did it pass by heredity down the ever-winding stream of human beings? Or had the process of evolution at the very beginning of human race already brought into existence an innumerable company of souls designated for all the bodies of men to be born during the subsequent ages of the existence of the race? We cannot accept the theory of the descent of the soul. Each soul has its own history and its own destiny. The stem cell out of which the human body is developed through the stages of embryonic existence does not contain any portion of the soul of the parent. On the universally accepted theory, every individual man receives, at some period of his early development, a spirit made at once out of hand, to use Professor LeConte's expression. Either the deity is forever creating these souls as the millions of human beings are entering upon their earthly existence, or nature is constantly bringing them forth by the gestative process of which Professor LeConte speaks. Mr. Fisk, too, speaks of the nascent human soul and regards it as developing concurrently with nature's upward progress. But this seems to be only a tacit acquiescence in the accepted theory. No one attempts to prove such an evolution of the spiritual. It seems to be taken for granted, and no one heretofore has questioned it. The materialist, of course, believes in, or at least asserts, the development of the soul out of the material world by the forces of the physical process. The hypothesis we are considering takes the universe out of the hands of the materialist and relieves men like Fisk, LeConte, and Wallace of the necessity of defending untenable positions. We see then that the whole problem of a future life is lifted above scientific support and beyond the need of it. It is, in a way, a transcendental problem. Science in its farthest development can neither prove nor disprove it. But we are not, for all that, destitute of cogent and convincing arguments for humanity's abiding hope. Mr. Fisk has formulated a most impressive argument in the favor of the everlasting reality of religion, which is quite as potent in behalf of the future life of the soul. It is something as follows. As we look back over the life history of our planet, we trace the course of an infinitely slow series of adjustments of inner relations to outward relations. The upward advancement toward humanity has been characterized by an ever-widening environment with which the living organism is brought into correspondence. Every stage of enlargement has had reference to actual existence outside. There was an actual environment in every instance to which the living organism ever more and more perfectly adjusted itself. A supreme moment arrived when love was beginning to play a part in hitherto unknown, when notions of right and wrong were germinating in the nascent human soul. A moment when the process of evolution was being shifted to a higher plane, when civilization was to be added to organic evolution, when the last and highest of creatures was coming upon the scene, when the dramatic purpose of creation was approaching fulfillment. Then we see the nascent human soul reaching out towards something akin to itself outside the realm of fleeting phenomena, seeking adjustment of its internal relations in correspondence with external relations in the unseen universe. It was the primal effort of the mind of man to put itself in relation with a world with which it had no sensible contact, but of which it was conscious. This was the birth of religion coeval with the origin of humanity, which has played a dominant part in all the evolution of human society, so that without it, what the race's history would be is quite beyond imagination. No one can deny that religion has been the largest and most ubiquitous fact connected with the existence of man upon earth. Now, that in this relation between the soul and the unseen universe, only the subjective or inner term or member should be real and the outward or objective term should be non-existence, is something for which we can find no precedent whatever in the whole course of creation's history. Everywhere the correspondence is between actual inner relations and actual outward existences. There could be no life or being without a reality within, adjusting itself to a reality without. If one term in the relation be real, the other term must be real also. By all the analogies of evolution, we are compelled to posit the reality of the unseen world in relation with the human soul. We are driven inevitably to the conclusion that the unseen universe, as the objective term in a relation of fundamental importance that has coexisted with the whole career of mankind, has a real existence. We have based our hypothesis upon the fact that the deepest fundamental postulate of science is the reality of an unseen universe, whence is derived the energy and the very existence of this present physical process. This universe, unseen, exists as an eternal reality, and man has always sustained relations of adjustments thereto. This continuous adjustment of inner relations to outward relations is life. Therefore, man lives here and now in spiritual relations. Religion is this continuous adjustment of the soul of man to the spiritual environment. Therefore, religion is spiritual life. This relation of fundamental importance, coexistence with the whole career of mankind, between the soul and the spiritual universe, suggests the possibility of its continuance after the termination of physical existence. The earthly life of the individual is an ever-increasing correspondence of the soul with the external environment, the physical world. Quote, "The more specific and accurate, the more complex and extensive is the response to environing relations, the higher and richer we say is the life. The whole course of the mental development is the increasing of the points of intelligent contact with the physical environment. There is no education or evolution or development of the psychical nature of man in physical relations. The so-called mental growth is but the development of the powers of the physical organ, the brain, with the organs of sense, through which the soul derives its knowledge of the outside world, and by which it manifests its own activities and purpose. All this intellectual growth is correlated to and concurrent with a constant and vast increase of cerebral surface. So too, when civilized man is contrasted intellectually with savage or primeval man, we discover an enormous development of brain complexity and cerebral surface. The soul then, constituted of the substance or energy of the infinite, eternal, and infinitely energetic psychical universe, comes to know more and more of the physical world and its variety of living relations as the developing physical organism brings it into ever wider correspondence therewith. As was shown long ago by Professor Drummond, correspondence and knowledge are identical, and correspondence and life are one. Therefore, knowledge is life. This is certainly true of this present life in physical relations. The wider our correspondences, the profounder our knowledge, and the deeper and richer our life. We thus see the practical and philosophical significance of the profound utterance of Jesus. This is life eternal, that they may know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. End of quote. Through our senses, we are brought into correspondence with our material environment. These senses are powers of perception by 5 physical organs. We are able to study and investigate minutely the constitution and structure of each one of these organs. We can examine in detail the peculiar arrangement of nerves as well as the origin and termination of each nerve. We are also able to trace the course of every sensation from the presence and action of some external object to the chemical or physical activity in the brain. What we know of the world without us is through these 5 avenues of communication. The infant is born with these bodily organs of sense. The world without begins at once to send its messages into the brain through ear and eye and the sense of feeling. The different portions of the brain are thrown into agitation, and there we bring our investigation to a close. But these brain movements are interpreted, and the mind of the child gradually comes thereby into acquaintance with the phenomena of the outside world. The form of a man sends innumerable rays of light into the infant's eyes. A picture of the man is formed upon the retina. Certain effects are transmitted along the optic nerves to the brain, and at length, after many repetitions of this experience, the idea man is formed in the mind. At first, the notion is a general one, and no distinction is made between one man and another. For a comparatively long period of time, the child regards every man as its father, and even after having acquired the ability to talk, will call any man Papa. It will at times show preference for its father because it learns to associate him with its pleasant experiences. All the growth of the mind of the infant is, then, only a fuller and more perfect understanding of these sensations caused by the action of the outer world upon the brain. The sound of a human voice falls upon the ear of the infant. A train of activities is initiated which results again in the movements in the brain. The child starts at the shock of the sound, but no idea is awakened. The message from the outside world is not understood. It has no significance. At length you observe that there is some perception of the sound and that some meaning is attached to it. The eyes open wide, and a movement is made as if the child were endeavoring to learn from which direction the sound comes and what it signifies. A little later, and the sound of the mother's voice is recognized, and when that voice is heard, you observe the face beam with pleasure, and the whole body seems to thrill with delight. A step further, and the different moods or feelings of the mother are associated with the tones of the voice. The mother is angry, the tone of voice betrays it, and the child trembles with fear at the sound. All this comes from the ever more and more perfect interpretation of movements of the molecules of the brain. At length, the child has learned to talk, and can understand the speech of those about it, but this understanding is but the interpretation of molecular movements in the brain caused by waves of the air originating with a human voice. The child learns to read at length. The words of an author are conveyed through the sense of sight to the brain, causing certain molecular movements in the brain, and the mind acquires knowledge of the author's thought by the interpretation of these movements. So as the sensual experience of the child grows, ever wider and more varied, the knowledge acquired by the mind is the result altogether of the interpretation of chemical and physical effects produced in the brain. Thus does the objective world come to the knowledge of the spiritual subject. The more highly organized, and hence the more sensitive the brain, the more intimate and profound the knowledge of the world without. When we come to study the manifestation of the soul through the organism, all we are able to investigate scientifically is that series of phenomena beginning with molecular movements in the brain and issuing in some outward act or expression. Thus, I will to rise from my chair and I go to my library shelves to get a book treating the subject about which my mind is engaged. The act of my will starts physical and chemical effects in the brain, and then the series of outward acts all follow in their natural order. Or I will to meditate upon some abstract subject, and my mind by its spiritual activities sets in motion innumerable and concomitant activities in the brain, which may result in speech or in writing or some other form of expression. So far as we can investigate these phenomena, they originate in brain activities, develops the powers of the brain, and all that we call mental education is but the development of the brain to receive external impression and to give utterance to subjective ideas. As we have seen, the soul stands as an observer, interpreting certain subtle molecular movements and associating them with certain objects in the outside world, which were the original causes of the movements referred to. Hereby, it is desired to show that evolution in the development and improvement of the highest individual, as in that of the race, is entirely physical and never enters into the domain of the spiritual. If the soul is constituted, as our hypothesis makes most reasonable, out of the substance or energy of the spiritual universe, and has relations to the physical world only through the brain and the sensory organs, then its real life is in correspondence with the psychical environment, and its essential relations are with spiritual realities, or may become so. The life of the soul is absolutely independent of its physical relations and correspondences. The soul employs the organs of the living organism to bring itself into acquaintance with the physical process. We may therefore maintain, as heretofore, that the question of the soul's future life, which is but the continuance of its present life, is one that altogether transcends investigation by any possible methods of physical science. Note: some years ago, Professor LeConte startled the thinking world by setting forth in the form of a striking illustration a novel theory of the origin of the immortal spirit of man. His illustration was as follows, quote, "Nature may be likened to a level water surface. This represents individuated physical and chemical force. On this surface, some individuating force pulls up a portion of the water into a commencing drop. This represents the condition of spirit in plants. Or by greater force, the surface may be lifted higher into a nipple-like eminence simulating a drop, or into an almost complete drop with only a neck-like connection with the general surface. This represents the condition of spirit in the higher animals. In all these cases, even though the drop be nearly completed, if we remove the individuating or lifting force, the commencing drop is immediately drawn back by cohesion and refunded into the general watery surface. Once complete the drop, and there is no longer any tendency to revert, even though the lifting force be removed. This represents the condition of spirit in man." End of note. If we should substitute the infinite, eternal, psychical universe for the word nature, and the psychical energy for physical and chemical force in the above, the illustration would be an apt one of our theory of the origin of personality. We have assumed the power in the highly developed brain to individuate the substance or energy of the psychical universe and thus create the soul or personality. It must be borne in mind that the figure given in the next is not intended at all as a scientific statement of the results of experiment or actual observation, but simply as affording a conceivable and reasonable account of the soul's origin. Such a supposition must be accepted as a product of the scientific use of the imagination. It may be very far from an exact description of the mode of the origin of personality, and yet it is legitimate and warranted by the facts before established. We are not obliged to discover and state the exact method of the soul's origin or to give the modus operandi of its creation. It is sufficient, accepting the human personality as an actual existent entity, to show this fact to be conceivable in accordance with our general hypothesis. Upon the hypothesis that the highly developed brain of man is capable of individuating the substance or energy of the psychical universe and thus creating personality, it may be objected that a soul created by a brain that is doomed soon to perish must itself cease to be when that catastrophe overtakes the physical organ of mind. So far as we can show by our present method, this may be so. Taking our illustration literally, it would seem that the vortex motion on the surface of the stream must cease when the submerged obstacle is removed. But we are not warranted in straining an illustration to such a length. We cannot say what other forces may come into play tending to further individuate the incipient soul. As Helmholtz has shown that in the case of the vortex atom created in a perfect fluid, such motion could not be arrested by any force known to us, so the individuated energy constituting the soul may be eternal in its activities. End of chapter. Chapter 9. God. A quote by Romanes. I am in full agreement with Professor Clifford in believing that monism is destined to become the generally accepted system of things, seeing that it is the only theory of things that can receive the sanction of science on the one hand and of feeling on the other. But I disagree with him in holding that the theory is fraught with implications of an anti-theistic kind. In my opinion, this theory leaves the question of theism very much where it was before. End of quote. A quote by St. Augustine. No man climbs to God by the pathway of the stars who has not first faced him in the inner sanctuary of his soul. End quote. A quote by Martineau. The conclusion then is again on this ground irresistible, that the one power that appears under guise so various must, in order to be adequate to its highest demands, include all that its supreme phases display, and must be thought of not as the gravitation that answers to our weight, not as the undulation which reaches us in the form of heat, not even as the vital current of our life, but as the soul of our soul, the fountain and prototype of our thought and conscience, with whom our relation rises at once from the convertibility of force into communion of spirit. End of quote. Our conception is of an infinite, eternal, infinitely energetic, psychical universe in which things of sense have neither place nor meaning, the differential attribute of which is thought or intelligence apart from its physical manifestation, in which things or beings sustain only spiritual or psychical relations. So far as the energy of this infinite and eternal unseen universe is revealed in the physical and psychical phenomena of the physical world, there is no evidence that consciousness and volition are attributes, properties, or characteristics of this unseen universe. We further conceive of this universe as the perfect objective to the eternal self-existent subject, through which and in which his omnipotent will acts and executes his beneficent purposes. This unseen universe is the all-embracing and all-producing universe, the cosmos. The physical world and all possible worlds are but temporary phases of the manifestation of the infinite forms of the energy of the unseen. All possible or conceivable worlds or processes arise out of the unseen, are sustained and energized by it, at length return into it, bearing all the enduring products of their progressive development. God is immanent in this infinite and eternal cosmos. Only in a secondary sense is the deity immanent in the physical world. In the unseen, God's will is perfectly done without possibility of failure or variation, because its infinite energy is adequate to utter the divine mind. Through the physical process, we observe the eternal spiritual energy giving expression ever more nearly adequate and perfect to the divine purposes. We have seen that a necessity of thought requires us to hypothesize somewhat as objective to God. If God is eternal, and if he is not eternal, he is not God, then must that which is objective to him be eternal also. God is infinite, and only an infinite universe could be ever in objective relations to God. Our hypothesis of an infinite, eternal, and infinitely energetic psychical universe meets this logical necessity fully, and by it, all the phenomena of the physical world are adequately accounted for. Evolution removed deity from immediately behind phenomena and was at first antagonized by theologians as banishing God from his universe. Natural theology was arrayed against the monstrous atheistic theory that proposed to originate and develop a world without a God. For a long period of time, the advocates of evolution were regarded as the enemies of theism, because that doctrine placed secondary agencies and causes between phenomena and the great first cause. Subsequently, it became clear that the theory of evolution did not push deity out of the universe, but opened the way to discover where God is in a developing world. The Darwinian theory of natural selection overthrew the argument from design. Yet, as Mr. Fisk says, when thoroughly understood, it will be found to replace as much teleology as it destroys. Quote, "The doctrine of evolution points to an evident dramatic tendency, a distinctly marked progress of events towards a mighty goal. The story which we can decipher is sufficiently impressive and consoling. It clothes our theistic belief with moral significance, reveals the intense and solemn reality of religion, and fills the heart with tidings of great joy. Since the Darwinian theory has been fully studied in its application to the genesis of man, a wonderful flood of light has been thrown upon the meaning of evolution, and there appears a reasonableness in the universe such as had not appeared before. As to the conception of deity, in the shape impressed upon it by our modern knowledge, I believe I have now said enough to show that it is no empty formula or metaphysical abstraction which we would seek to substitute for the living God. Practically, there is a purpose in the world whereof it is our highest duty to learn the lesson, however well or ill we may fare in rendering a scientific account of it. When from the dawn of life we see all things working together toward the evolution of the highest spiritual attributes of man, we know, however, the words may stumble in which we try to say it, that God is in the deepest sense a moral being." End of quote. Footnote: John Fisk from The Idea of God. End of footnote. This long quotation from one of the most eloquent expounders of the doctrine of evolution will be pardoned by the reader, as it shows the attitude of the scientific mind toward the belief in God. Since our theory does not in any way modify the doctrine of evolution as now stated and accepted, whatever evidence that theory affords of the existence and attributes of God would be quite as valid, if not indeed of much greater value, on the hypothesis it is herein sought to establish. God is not to be regarded as the agency to which phenomena of the physical process are due as a source, in accordance with the present view. The immediate source of phenomena is the infinite and eternal psychical universe, and phenomena themselves are manifestations of the energizings of the unseen. The direction of these activities toward the realization of ultimate purposes is by the absolute will and wisdom of God. Thus only is God manifest in nature. The formal declaration of Mr. Fisk, as a representative Spencerian, that the infinite and eternal power manifested in every pulsation of the universe is none other than the living God, we have shown strong reason to reject. We have offered a more rational account of the origin of the power manifested in the phenomena of the physical world. We have seen that intelligence of a very high order can exist without conscious purpose or volition. Such intelligence we have found in the unicellular organism and in every separate cell of the multicellular organism. Such intelligence is seen in high degree of power in the instincts of the animals nearest man, which possess no self-directing will. In the physical organism of man, there are innumerable intelligent activities constantly going on in the cells and vital organs which are not only not directed by the human will, but of which the mind is not conscious, and over which the will can exert no control whatever. These unconscious, involuntary activities proceed with the same intelligent precision in the body of an unconscious idiot as in the strong and healthy body of the man in full possession of all his mental powers. So is God related to the universe as the ultimate will, directing all activities toward the accomplishment of his own purposes. Then the forward and upward progress of development points to an originating and governing personality. God is revealed in the dramatic tendency of the world's evolution, the one far-off divine event toward which the whole creation moves, witnesses to the omnipotent presence of God in the universe. The innumerable, unconscious, and involuntary activities taking place continually in the human body do not afford any evidence of the presence and attributes of the personal, self-conscious spirit. No more do the phenomena of the physical world furnish any evidence of God's presence in the world. The argument from design has been shown to be incompetent. Paley's reasoning has been invalidated by the law of natural selection. The time is now past when Diderot's declaration that one could slay an atheist with a butterfly's wing or the eye of a gnat can be regarded as anything but the statement of vain fancy. The marvelous ingenuity displayed in the construction of the eye does not afford us any evidence whatever of the wisdom of God, but shows the wonderful intelligence manifested in the germ cells, the duty of which it is to construct the organ of sight. We have seen that a most rational account can be given of this intelligence as a manifestation of the infinitely intelligent energy of the unseen acting through highly organized cells as loci of its activities. Man's voluntary acts reveal his personality and character. Virtue, benevolence, and integrity are shown in a man's conduct ordered by a self-directing will. His wisdom is also evinced in his direction of his activities towards the realization of his purposes and plans. In the attainment of determined ends in the world without, he employs forces and agencies whose use he has discovered. He generates steam and has learned to apply its expansive force to the moving of machinery and to locomotion. He has discovered electricity and has learned to make use of it for the accomplishment of innumerable purposes. Many forms of chemical and physical energy he has mastered and made the ready servants of his will, directed by his wisdom. These forms of physical energy do not reveal man in their activities, but only as those activities manifest the ordering and control of a designing and purposing mind. So the infinite forms of energy in the physical universe do not, in every instance of their activity, reveal God, but only as they exhibit a dramatic tendency and a progress of events towards the realization of some ultimate and worthy purpose. Man comes by slow degrees and painful effort to knowledge of the physical forces and their application to the realizing of his purposes, but God knows and controls all the eternal forces of the unseen which do his will without failure and accomplish unerringly his beneficent purposes. Mr. Fiske, in The Idea of God, has very much that is both pertinent and wise to say about the conflict between two ideas of God which have been more or less widely accepted in Christian thought. The one, that of Clement of Alexander, Origen, and Athanasius, represented deity as immanent in nature or in the universe. The other, that of Augustine, regarded God as a creator and ruler of the world from the outside. The former idea was vague, general, and closely related to pantheism. The latter, artificial, anthropomorphic, and leading to atheism, because it gives the ongoing of the universe over to blind physical forces. Quote, "It is interesting to note that this atheism of the ancient Latin world follows directly from that species of theism which placed God outside of his universe. We shall find the case of modern atheism to be quite similar. As soon as this crude and misleading conception of God is refuted, the modern atheist or positivist falls back upon his universe of blind forces and contents himself with it, while zealously shouting from the housetops that this is the whole story." End of quote. Footnote, John Fiske from The Idea of God, page 92. End footnote. This latter theory is older than Christianity. Plato, contemplating the wickedness and misery of the world, pronounced the material universe essentially evil, and so could not think of a pure and holy deity as manifested in it. He therefore separates the creator from creation by an infinite abyss. The followers of Epicurus regarded the gods as altogether indifferent to the woes and sufferings of man, dwelling apart in a state of undisturbed bliss. The world was therefore left under the sway of blind forces, as we find depicted by Lucretius in De Rerum Natura. In the teachings of St. Augustine, not only is the material world separated from God, but sin, original and actual, has cut off man from his Creator. To bring about access to God and to reestablish the divine and human relationship, the mediation of the offices of an organized church is necessary. This doctrine of God sustaining these external relations to his creation gives rise, as we have said, to anthropomorphic conceptions of God, representing deity as actuated by human passions and purposes, localized in space and far removed from the world of his creation. From his far distant abode, he could invade the world only by violating the laws of its orderly ongoing. His every appearance in the midst of the world's activities was attended by miraculous and unaccountable consequences. By the theory of the divine immanence, God is regarded as omnipresent, as standing back off and directing every activity in the physical process. Then we must conceive of the divine mind, or will, as immediately responsible for the fungus and the parasite. The claw and the talon and the fang are his creatures. The infinite intelligence brings forth through a long process of evolution the multitudes of imperfect and ill-developed creatures in every species of vegetable and animal life that perish before maturity is reached. It is God who acts in every manifestation of physical force. All phenomena are the immediate revelations of divine agency. Theoretically, God is conceived as a personal being, distinct from the objective universe, but practically the subject and object are identified. Or the world is regarded as a simple substance in mass, acted upon this everywhere present deity. In this conception, nature is the body and God is the animating soul. Upon the hypothesis we are presenting, the divine agency stands back of the infinite energy of the perfect psychical universe. In the eternal cosmos of spiritual relations, the will of deity is perfectly done. There are no failures of his purposes, no imperfection in the products of his infinite energy. In the finite world of sense, in which a few of what might be called the inferior forms of psychical energy are manifested, only the larger plan, the ultimate purposes are of God. God, as revealed in the material world, has neither personality nor free will. Mr. Matthew Arnold goes as far as is warranted by all the discoveries of science, if not a step further, when he represents God as the power not ourselves that make for righteousness. Mr. Huxley, too, goes a great way into the region of pure speculation when he defines God as the power behind phenomena, the same which wells up in us in self-consciousness. This quasi-pantheistic conception of the divine immanence is too vague and evasive to form a basis for ordinary religious belief. It empties the idea of God of all significance for the human soul. It may lend a degree of rationality to the thought of God as he is held to be revealed in nature, but offers a unifying principle utterly void of any attributes of personality. But by our hypothesis, the principle of unity is provided without the sacrifice of the infinite personality. The teleological argument for the being of God yields no God of value for religious uses. What care we in those hours of aspirations and adoration that our deity has exhibited consummate skill and ingenuity as an architect or an engineer? What we yearn for is a being who can respond as a person to our spirit's loves and cravings. Intelligence and power are alone revealed in the physical process, and these the soul cannot affectionately adore. In this process, the power back of phenomena shows no divine attributes. We cannot guess whether it is well or ill disposed toward us. We may feel awe, dread, or wonder toward such a power. We can never worship it. The philosophy which has dominated largely the thought of today bids us pause in our search for God, because the quest must be in vain, for the power we call God is unknowable. We cannot comprehend him. We cannot formulate any rational statement of his being and attributes. Nature, indeed, affords us data quite too meager for the forming of any conception whatever of the divine being. Man, however, reveals God, as he alone is able to receive the revelation of God. The human personality cannot exist without the divine personality. It is the personal man who worships and holds communion with the personal God. Man does not know God as revealed in the phenomena of nature, but as speaking into the ear of the soul. The very existence of finite personal beings demands the being of the absolute person. We have before shown it to be beyond all doubt that personal beings exist. The conclusion is inevitable that the absolute being exists, in whose thought and purpose all things consist. It would not come within the scope of this book to draw up in full array the evidences which have been formulated for the being and attributes of God as revealed in man. Suffice it to say that whatever argument for this truth is valid upon the prevailing hypothesis of God in relation to the physical process is rendered more powerful upon the hypothesis here suggested and maintained. The subordinate hypothesis that the brain of man, having reached an advanced degree of complexity in structure and constitution, individuates forces of the psychical universe, does not account for those qualities or attributes of personality as characteristics of the unconscious, though intelligent energy of the unseen. Self-consciousness and freedom of the will must be distinctive characteristics and powers of personality, as such whereby relations are created and maintained among personal beings. These relations, existing among finite persons, we term moral or ethical. Between the finite personality and God, we call them religion. All these relations are entirely apart from physical correlations. God is revealed in the constitutional religiousness of man. Religion may be defined as the consciousness of the soul's relation to God. This consciousness of God is the highest distinctive characteristic of man and shows his individuation from the infinite, psychical universe. It is in this consciousness there arise those obstinate questionings of sense and outward things, fallings from us, vanishings, blank misgivings of a creature moving about in worlds not realized, high instincts before which our mortal nature did tremble like a guilty thing surprised, those first affections, those shadowy recollections, which, be they what they may, are yet the fountain light of all our day, are yet the master light of all our seeing. Uphold us, cherish, and have power to make our noisy years seem moments in the being of the eternal silence. Truths that wake, to perish never. End of chapter. And also this is the end of the reading of Cosmos, the Soul and God, a monistic interpretation of the facts and findings of science. Please do hit the like button. I do look forward to your comments, and subscribe for more.